Okay, so here's an example of jumping on a premise when you know to. This is basically being sold as a unofficial follow-up to The Beekeeper, which starred Jason Statham as a former special agent codenamed the Beekeeper, who was working as an actual beekeeper, who decides to murder the entire internet when financial scammers cause the suicide of a woman he knew. And so this, where his character is a construction worker who is fighting human traffickers and used to be a special forces guy, is effectively a less interesting version of that. Jason Statham as a construction worker is slightly less absurd than Jason Statham as a beekeeper, and a bunch of Russian gangsters are slightly less absurd bad guys than the entire internet, so it's a slightly less interesting movie. This is technically an adaptation of the first in a series of pulp novels known as the Levon Cade series by formerly well-regarded comic book writer Chuck Dixon, and actually carries a screenplay by Sylvester Stallone. And if you're wondering why the promotion for this isn't making a bigger deal out of those two still nominally well-known names being attached in its production, you are also probably still wondering why that Mark Wahlberg hijacking movie was trying to pretend that it wasn't directed by Mel Gibson. So basically, a studio had a mid-budget action movie that could sort of be reconfigured in the marketing to more closely resemble another movie from the same director and star to hopefully open bigger, so they're doing that. The fact that Statham's character is also a construction worker doesn't really figure much into the premise of the movie. He uses a sledgehammer once to do one thing, and he has one fight scene unrelated to the rest of the plot at a construction site early on in the movie, and that's pretty much it. I think he takes some tools out of a toolbox once, and it's edited into the fight scene to much more prominently so it can be in the trailers. Otherwise, he mostly shoots guys with guns and punches and does MMA stuff, which is just fine. It's a perfectly serviceable action stuff, but it is amusing to see how much they've reconfigured the marketing here to get people to show up for quasi-Beekeeper 2, when otherwise this is basically more of a straightforward Jack Reacher type former special forces guy looking for bad guys doing a thing movie than it is a sequel to that more interesting earlier movie. Anyway, pretext here, yeah, Statham is a former special forces guy. He's working construction to try and earn money to fight a legal battle to get custody of his daughter. He's also a widower because that's sympathetic. His boss's daughter gets kidnapped by human traffickers. They are Russian bad guys here. I think they were Ukrainian in the novel. There's some background graffiti stuff that maybe implies that at whatever point they actually shot this, they still were, and that got reworked because they have that what movies think Russian gangsters are thing, which is basically vampires on steroids with lots of tattoos. They're fun bad guys. It's also a very tonally confused movie where the first two acts of it are a very straightforward, old school, something you could have done in the 70s, a Charles Bronson movie. Guy follows guys around, does detective stuff, goes into bars, regular warehouses, gets into punch-ups, gets into shoot-ups, pretty straightforward stuff. And then the last third of it feels a lot like somebody got a studio note back that said this needs to get kicked up a little bit, so David Ayer, do more of your thing. So the last whole fight is in this evil bad guy casino farmhouse place that looks like a horror movie set with a big gigantic full moon backdrop, and there's a whole bunch of extra henchmen on motorcycles. One dude's wearing chainmail. I think I saw a samurai. The final boss villain is dressed as Dr. Demento for some reason, and suddenly it's like Mario Bava made a colorized version of Sin City. There's some fun to be had here, but it's kind of a slog getting there. At 90 minutes, this could have been a pretty good TBS afternoon Jason Statham movie. At almost 2 hours, it's a real bit of a slog. Even though there's not really anything wrong with it, there's not exactly enough right with it. Call this a 6 out of 10. If you have a chance, just watch The Beekeeper again instead.